Hi, I'm Brian Libris. As some of you may remember, I posted this video in August of 2019 talking about some game mechanics that I thought could be changed. I mentioned things like making the Moss Rock and the Ice Rock be interchangeable with the Leaf Stone and the Ice Stone, and making the Affection and Friendship stats just be the same one. Things that, as we now know, actually were done in Pokemon Sword and Shield.
You're gonna take full credit, aren't you?
And so, since there's someone pretty high up at Game Freak or the Pokemon Company who is clearly watching this channel, I want to do it again. But this time, I want to focus on some more big picture concepts that I think need to be abandoned or revised. Which is also why I'm making this video early, so that you, Game Freak, have time to adjust. We'll still talk about some mechanics though. Let's start at the beginning. Almost every Pokemon game begins with the protagonist in a small town and the professor is not far away. There's a few reasons that I think this should change. From a world building point of view, it seems statistically unlikely that almost every protagonist in the series would come from a small town when there's so many more people living in larger cities. It also seems much more likely that a major research laboratory would be in a city and not in a tiny town with nothing else to offer. But also, along those same lines, what are the chances the protagonist almost always starts their journey so close to where the professor lives? In Generation 6, 7, and 8, we don't even get our starter Pokemon from the professor, so there's not any need for them to be nearby. The professor could be someone we don't even meet until halfway through the game, like a much more exaggerated version of what we had in Gen 6. Plus, if we start in a city, we can really hit the ground running. We get our starter Pokemon, there's probably a few people around we can practice battling with, we learn the basics at the trainer school if we need to, maybe even get our first gym badge. Plus we get to familiarize ourselves with Pokemon centers and Pokemon marts, maybe there's a department store where we can stock up on all kinds of supplies. And since we'd also have access to salons and apparel shops pretty much right away, we would also be able to do as much or as little character customization as we want right off the bat. Basically, starting in a big city means that the city itself can be your tutorial section, and as soon as we leave home for good, we're as independent as we need to be. I think Gen 7 did it the best so far. We start in the outskirts of Hau'oli City, and Hau'oli does have a lot to offer. So I basically want something like that, but without Kukui's lab being basically next door, and where we actually go to the city first instead of to Iki Town. Gen 7 will probably come up a lot here because it's the most significant departure we've had from the Pokemon formula recently, and I think we need to build on that. Like exploring different kinds of antagonists. Until Gen 6, every game had an evil organization that wanted to change, or dominate, or destroy the world. Team Rocket maybe less so, but still. So it was really refreshing when in Generation 7 it turns out that the true villains are the good guys. Although the cutscene at the start kind of ruins the plot twist. And again in Generation 8 when the true villain was capitalism basically. But every game still has an evil team. Team Skull and the Ether Foundation, or Team Yell and Macrocosmos, thematically they are quite different from previous antagonists, but in terms of the structure of the game and the story, they still serve the same role. And I don't think we need to have a villain every time. In Gen 8, almost show this. We go most of the game focusing only on the gym challenge and the character growth of our rivals, with only a few glimpses of something bigger happening. Team Yell are there to be roadblocks, and there are problems with pacing, but the story of Pokemon Sword and Shield is almost entirely about the gym challenge. And if you want to make a game that focuses on the gyms, why not just do that? Write a story that lets you focus on the gyms rather than stealing the spotlight at the last minute. Or if you want to write a story about a legendary Pokemon, why not do that? Make it a story about exploration and discovery where finding the legendary Pokemon is our objective. We don't need to be competing against someone else or trying to stop a world-ending tragedy for the story to be interesting and fulfilling. And yes, I realize that I'm describing the premise of the Crown Tundra, which was not done well at all, but I think it could have been. The Pokemon world is such a fascinating place. I find it dull that with almost every game we see pretty much exactly the same kind of story. And you don't even need to change the structure of the game much to make that work, just the frame, the story. Pokemon battles are the most important aspect of a main series Pokemon game, but even those can use a few changes. In terms of the battle structure, I think there's very little that needs to change, but there is one change that would make a huge difference towards making the battles more dynamic, and that would be to reduce the number of notifications for various in-battle events. For example, when a spread move is super effective or not very effective on both opponents, we get a combined notification. If a Pokemon has multiple stats dropped or increased at the same time, there are separate notifications for each stat, but at least the animation only plays once. But if there's a critical hit, that's a separate notification. If multiple Pokemon get the same stat change, those don't get combined, they're shown one at a time. If there's field effects that hurt or heal Pokemon at the end of the turn, like hail or grassy terrain, those trigger separately for each Pokemon. And if there's a status condition, that's yet another notification. Get rid of as many notifications as you can. Many of them can be combined, like grassy terrain healed some HP from these Pokemon. Some of them can be replaced with a visible and audible cue, like a slightly different sound effect and animation when a move is super effective or not very effective or a critical hit. Which is actually something that Pokemon Masters does. And they also have separate but simultaneous notifications for stat changes and such, and I love how dynamic the battles are in this game.
Yeah, he plays it all the time.
Also in that vein, I would love to see double battles and maybe even triple battles and rotation battles, if you ever want to bring those back, have a bigger role in the main game.
Double battle, double battle!
Doubles are the official format for VGC, so to me it makes no sense that the game trains us almost exclusively on singles. And I find doubles much more interesting, a lot more dynamic and unpredictable. And speaking of dynamic and unpredictable, can we drop the idea of type specialists? Or at least only use them early in the game when a newcomer may still be getting used to the basics of type matchups?
Like the gym in Gen 5, except of elemental monkeys, put the starters.
Once we're used to types, it is so easy to defeat a type specialist. As long as you have one Pokemon with a good type advantage, whether because you planned for it or by coincidence, you're pretty much good to go. Rival battles tend to be pretty good for this. The best champions don't specialize on a type, and those tend to be the most interesting battles. Have other themes to base your major battles around, like the Root Kahunas from Generation 7, who specialized on using an item or a specific strategy.
That's good prep for competitive battles.
Yes. Exactly. Or Raihan being much more of a weather gym leader than a dragon gym leader. Unfortunately, he's only one gym leader and the last one. And frankly, he didn't even use the weather to his advantage properly when I battled him. How about forfeiting? Normally we aren't allowed to run from a trainer battle, but why not? When we know that we can't win, why can't we forfeit? Why are we forced to put our Pokemon through a battle that we know is going to knock them out? Maybe it's okay to not let us run from a gym battle or a league battle, but a regular battle on a route? Sure, if we can run from any trainer battle, it basically makes those battles optional, which does affect the difficulty of the game. But you can compensate by putting the right balances in place. Maybe we have to give up a lot more money if we want to forfeit. Or the experience that we get from trainer battles is much higher than what we can get from wild battles, and so we have that incentive to engage with trainers. And while we're on the subject, can we change how fleeing from wild Pokemon works too? It seems silly to base it on speed. Different species of Pokemon behave differently towards us when we encounter them in the overworld, so I think it would be cool if the more aggressive Pokemon that chase after us, like a Sneasel or an Electrike, were also harder to run from. And conversely, maybe the Pokemon that run away from us when we encounter them in the overworld, like a Squovit or a Chansey, maybe those Pokemon are easier to run from, but they also have a chance to flee.
I don't like them having a chance to flee.
I admit that fleeing Pokemon was not the best idea in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, but in a game where you can actually battle the wild Pokemon, you can also prevent them from fleeing by using moves like Mean Look, or trapping them in a Fire Spin, or putting them to sleep. People frequently talk about Pokemon being shown to scale in battles, and I totally agree with that. But I would actually go a step further and say that everything should be to scale. Make interiors and exteriors to scale so that it doesn't feel like I'm stepping into the TARDIS every time I walk into a Pokémon Center or break into a stranger's house. Make spaces large enough that we can actually have a battle in without having to transition to a generic background. I mean, can you imagine having a battle in the actual overworld space that you encounter your opponent in? You'd have to find some creative solution for wild encounters so that there can be enough space between us and our Pokemon and the wild Pokemon, but I don't know, maybe they engage into battle mode from a distance? I loved how in Gen 7 there were trainers who would spot us from a distance and engage in battle without walking up to us like they used to.
Eek, did you touch me? No!
Gen 8 did it too, but Gen 7 was much more creative about it, with trainers seeing us through a hole in the wall or behind them as they bend over in a stretch. So I want more of that, but with bigger areas so that we actually have the space between us and the opponent to send out our properly scaled Pokemon. Quick one, can we please have some variety in the player families? We've pretty much only had single mothers. Why not some single fathers? Or, radical idea, a mother and a father who are both present, and not present like Norman.
Norman's the worst.
Don't get her started.
Worst father ever.
Oh no, I got her started.
Chooses Wally over you, just abandons you, tells you to visit your mom every once in a while. You visit your mom, Norman.
And hey, maybe even have same-sex parents. Pokemon really needs to improve on representation, especially of LGBTQ+ people, and that would be one way to do it. Although you should also stop making clothing options gender exclusive and just let everyone dress however they want. Here's the last one I want to talk about, and probably the one that's least likely to happen. I think that the differences between the two versions that are released together are too small to warrant continuing this tradition as it is. The stated purpose of releasing two versions is to encourage people to make friends and trade with each other. Certainly worked with me for the first few generations. But nowadays, with the GTS and Pokemon Home, I think this point is moot, because we can pretty easily get the version exclusives even if we don't personally know anyone to trade with. And a lot of people just buy both versions anyway, which is the other reason to make two versions, to sell more copies. But honestly, I don't understand why people buy both, especially now that we can have multiple save files of the same game. The differences just aren't enough to me. In most generations, the only differences are in the availability and rarity of certain Pokemon. Even when the legendary Pokemon involved with the plot is different, the plot itself is not. Some of the older games also had different sprites for Pokemon, but that's out the window. In Ruby and Sapphire, we had Team Aqua and Magma, either on our side or against us, and they had different motivations, which at least meant that the dialogue was a little bit different, but functionally, they're still the same. The structure of the game is the same. In Gen 5, there were two different versions of Opaloosid City, a high-tech version and a low-tech version, as well as the exclusive locations, Black City and White Forest. They look different, but functionally, again, they're basically the same. Same with the exclusive characters in Sword and Shield. They have different personalities, different dialogue, but again, their role in the game is the same. The experience of playing one version versus the other is only minimally different. So I don't think that you need to continue making two separate versions. There's other great ways to introduce variety into the experience of your game. You could do something more open world, but you don't even have to go that far. Just make it so that our choices matter. Maybe there's two different routes that we can take to get someplace, and when you choose one, the other one becomes inaccessible until much later on in the game, so that you have two different areas and very different pools of Pokemon to choose from. Or maybe the character interactions that we have or don't have throughout the game affect exactly how the events play out at the climax. But if you want to continue making two versions of every generation, and I suspect that you do, you should lean way more into making them actually be different. Maybe there are much bigger differences to the character arcs. There could be a character in one version who is really aggressive, kind of like Silver, and their story is that they learn to treat Pokemon as friends. Whereas in the other version, there is a character who is too meek, kind of like Bianca, and you have to help them gain confidence. Or even, for people who want Pokemon games to have character classes, make it so that each version has a different secondary objective, like contests in one version and breeding or research in the other. Alright, Game Freak, Pokemon, there you go. Those are the conventions that I think that you need to break, or at least review. But you should also read the comments section, because I'm pretty sure there will be not just people who see the brilliance of my ideas, but also people with genius ideas of their own that I'm sure you won't want to miss. I certainly won't. Thank you for watching, even if you don't work for Game Freak or the Pokemon Company or even Nintendo. And thank you to my patrons, especially luxury patron Ethan from Chicago. I'll see you in the next chapter.